Hello everyone, my name's Colin Graham. I'm chairing today and I'm really delighted to see so many people here. Thank you all for coming. As Pádraig was saying, the ARINS project has a particular remit, and one of the parts of its remit is to research what it calls the diverse identities and traditions on the island of Ireland and how they're understood, felt, expressed and promoted. And in this series of interviews we hear from individuals whose life experiences in particular shine a light on identity on the island and all its various manifestations. And talk to people who might help us think about the future of the island through their experience of identity. One of the most important manifestations of identity on the island of Ireland is through culture and particularly through sport. Some of you will know that there is an ARINS journal, Irish Studies and International Affairs, and a couple of years ago, Katie Liston and Joseph Maguire wrote about sport in that journal and talked about it as a powerful transfer mechanism for culture. And they talk about how the political complexities brought about by the partition of the island are reflected in sport. And that reflection is seen no more in any sport than in football, which is one of the sports on the island that is in itself effectively partitioned. To that end, I'm really delighted to welcome Pat Fenlon as our guest today. Pat will be known to many of you as a footballer, as a manager and a director of football, and as a pundit. We'll be talking about his career during the course of the interview. Pat has had experience playing and managing in different countries, in different contexts. Specifically, he was a pioneer on the managerial side of football in crossing the border, but also also a pioneer in the rethinking about how football is run on the island through the role of general manager. And I think above all, Pat is important because of his ability to think, to talk, to analyse, and also to think with integrity about his own experience and about football. He's been a great innovator on the island as well, and I have a particular personal pleasure in talking to Pat because I'm a lifelong Linfield fan, and Pat was a great hero for Linfield fans, both for the way that he played and then the way that he reformed the club in recent years and made it an incredible success. So it's a real pleasure to talk to you, Pat. Before we start talking about your own story and how you, and we're going to go through the various aspects of your kind of chronology and how your life has panned out in football, maybe you could start by giving us a sense of the role that you think identity, that soccer or football has in identity in Ireland today on both sides of the border.
Yeah, I think that's, first of all, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. I think it's an interesting question, and it's probably developed over a period of time. I've been involved in the game as a player from, I suppose, the early mid-80s when I went away to England to now as a director of football at Bohs, and the game has changed dramatically. I think sports, that identity thing around sport is difficult because my experience of it is that, it doesn't become an issue. It's not something that we discuss as players or coaches or managers. So, and that's probably the big difference in relation to sport that I've seen. And even back in the day when I did, go to Linfield, obviously it was a different time, but I'm not sure that was a huge, people maybe outside would see me going there, probably would have seen that as more of an issue than I did. But I think sport is just a great leveler. People just want to get on and play. When you're in a team sport, it doesn't matter what the background of people are. It's about a common goal of being successful. And I think that's the brilliant thing about sport.
Yeah. And we'll come on to maybe the Linfield experience a bit later. Could you talk a little bit about sport in your childhood then? Did you play football from a very early age?
I did, yeah. I grew up I was born in Ballymun. I grew up in Finglas South, moved to Finglas South when I was 3 or 4 years of age, and went to school in St. Vincent's in Glasnevin. And at that stage, primary school, we weren't allowed to play soccer, as we call it. I always call it football, but we had a Gaelic team who played Gaelic for the school. Didn't venture into the hurling too much, probably a bit rough. But yeah, like I said, that's where I went to school. I then went to Patrician College in Finglas as a secondary school, and probably my decision around that was probably more football orientated than academic, because they had a really successful football team. The great Ronnie Whelan went to the school before me, so and I probably paid more attention to my football than my studies. And it was just, the reason I started playing football, I was, like most kids at the time, we were out playing on the streets morning, noon and night, and my local postman seen me playing and asked me would I go down and play for Tulker Rovers in Finglas East. And that's how I started playing. It was just a case of go down and I signed for Tulker Rovers and just continued to play football. I did play a little bit of Gaelic and hurling for St. Fergal's in Finglas. Nothing too drastic, but never changed sport after that. It was just football all the way from probably 8 years of age in the structure of Tulker Rovers to when I stopped playing at Shelbourne.
Mm-hmm. What team did you support when you were that age?
I was a Celtic fan. I was a big Celtic fan, and this probably goes into the Linfield stuff a little bit more, but I'd never had any interest in English football. Bows fans won't be happy. I was a big Shamrock Rovers fan at the time as well, so Celtic and Shamrock Rovers are my two teams. You know, my mum and dad were from the south side of Dublin, both from Crumlin. So I used to spend a Sunday afternoon in both my grannies, and then we'd head up to Milltown from my dad's mum's, and that's how I ended up being a Rovers fan, and followed Rovers till I went away to England, to Chelsea. But Celtic was always my team. It was from a young kid. It was Celtic. That was it, and still is. I think once you have a club, you always have a club. So it never changes.
Absolutely, yeah. Would that have been unusual in your peers that you weren't so interested in the English league?
Yeah, it would have been then, and in them days, Liverpool were probably the team in the ascendancy. Probably in the 70s was Leeds, and then into when I started playing football structurally, it was Liverpool had the great team that won the European Cups. So most of my pals would have been Liverpool, Manchester United, Leeds supporters. So it was plenty of Celtic supporters now in Dublin, but in them days it probably wasn't as big a support as then, but it was just a club that my dad was a Celtic fan, so probably followed through from that as well, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a funny connection. My dad was a big Rangers fan, but I don't think I ever saw them play. But lots of his friends, they would go on day trips or weekend trips, which I think were really drinking trips to go and see Rangers. But it's a strange connection with something so far away, and in the pre-internet days, something that you could only read about in a way.
Yeah, and it's funny because even people talk to young people now about even being a supporter then of Celtic, like in them days up till probably late 80s, you couldn't buy a Celtic shirt in Dublin, so it was, like I said, it was one of my uncles was a big Celtic supporter, my dad's brother, and probably he led me into it more, so then he ended up being a Shells fan, so he would go to Shelbourne, I think they were in Harold's Cross at the time, from my grannies, and I'd go to Milltown, so it was a bit of a split there as well.
Yeah. So then you went to Chelsea as a youth player. What age were you when you went there?
I was 17, just turned 17. I'd actually played for the Republic of Ireland under Brian Kerr down in the Mardyke in Cork against Northern Ireland in under 17 international. I did quite well, and Chelsea asked me over for a trial. Trial didn't go great. We got beaten 10-1 by Tottenham, believe it or not. I scored a 1 goal, and they sent me home the next day and said, listen, go home, bring your dad over, and we want to sign you. So I signed a 3-year contract at Chelsea in 1980. That long ago, I think it was 85 or 86, yeah.
And then, so lots of, I know that from thinking about other Irish footballers who went off at a young age to the UK, they often talk about it being quite a lonely experience of being very young, slightly adrift in a big city usually. Was that your experience in London?
Yeah, it probably was. I think I always look at Chelsea as, from a football point of view, I didn't develop into being a first-team player. So from that experience, it was poor, but I always felt it gave me great life experience because I left home at that stage as a young boy, and in them days, you made your way, you got on the plane, you made your way to... I was really lucky because I ended up in Diggs in North London. We're a lovely couple, London man and a woman from Keough in County Kerry. So it was she was my second mum, I suppose, at that stage. So I was lucky in that regard, but in relation to living in a big city, yeah, it was lonely. Initially, I was very homesick. I stuck it out for a few years. But yeah, I've always said the life experience of living in London as a young 17-year-old in the 80s has stood to me. The football end of it, like I said, didn't go to plan, but the other side of it was definitely big life experience.
And what does that mean, that experience of being Irish in London in the 80s and being a young man, I suppose, in particular?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate. There was three of us. There was three lads. Four. There was a boy from Waterford, two Dublin lads, and then we had three lads from Belfast. And I ended up playing with one of the lads at Linfield. That was at Chelsea as a young boy as well, Stephen Beattie. So in them days, it was either English lads, Scottish, Welsh, Northern Republic of Ireland. So didn't have the big influx now of a lot of foreign players coming in. So it was a great experience, isn't it? Don't want to sound like it was a brilliant experience, and you're going away to play for Chelsea. They're not the club they are now. Them days had just got promoted back to the old First Division, the Premier League now. But they wouldn't have been in a strong position like they are now. But it was a brilliant experience, absolutely brilliant experience. Living in London at the time as an Irish person was obviously difficult with what was going on. So, but again, that's part of the experience I'm talking about. It's learning, it's life skills, and you're learning them as you go along.
You were talking about how footballers don't really think about identity in the way that we might in this kind of forum. But those bonds within teams, are they formulated around individuals usually, or do you find that there's common life experiences, or that maybe national identities help create bonds?
Yeah, there probably is, and there's that bit where we all feel, everybody has, like you say, they all have different identities, different beliefs, but, in that situation where you've got lads coming from Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, then English lads, they all have similar scenarios. We all want to be footballers, but we're all away from home, maybe bar the lads who are home-based in London. But it was even other English lads would have been from the north of England, or a couple of lads down around the Bristol area that would have been, again, in digs. So it was like you say, you're building that bond as a team to try win football matches. And listen, you always have that discussion. They all follow different clubs, with Scottish lads there who are big Rangers fans. So it was part of the day-to-day training and banter, as they call it in football. So it was that would always be there in football clubs. It's never any different. It still is.
Mm-hmm. And then after Chelsea, you came back to Ireland and played for a whole series of League of Ireland teams, St Pat's and Bows, and later Shamrock Rovers and Shells as well. When you look at that experience, can you kind of analyse what those teams mean to their supporters? Do different teams and different clubs have different characteristics? Do they draw on different sets of supporters, or did they at the time?
Yeah, I think the game has changed here, even in that regard. Even look at the club I'm at the moment. When I came back from England, I came back and I signed for Brian Kerr, who was the manager of St Pat's. And Brian would have he'd only started and he'd got a group together. We've always said we got a group of rejects together. We were all let go by other clubs, and Brian got them all together and moulded us into a league-winning team fantastically well. At that time, Pats had probably been in the doldrums, was based in the heart of Inchicore, so drew their support from that area, where Shells had been on the road a little bit and maybe drawn the support from. They would have had their home base probably in the Irishtown Rings End area. So Rovers, had that bigger support from around. Bows now has changed. The support has completely changed. So when I was there, not completely changed, but it's a different club. So I think for the better, the clubs have improved in relation to that fan base and how they see attracting newer people in there. I think in them days, the crowds weren't great. There wouldn't have been huge crowds at the matches. So it was probably the initiatives that clubs have shown now has helped in relation to trying to attract people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different areas of Dublin as well. So it's dramatically changed, I think.
Well, let's talk about the move you made to Linfield then. That was 93, 94?
94, I think.
94.
January 94, I signed for Linfield. Yeah.
Right. So that was a surprise for a lot of people. Was it something?
It was a surprise for me.
Yeah.
I was playing for Bows at the time, and we had changed manager, and I was a little bit disillusioned. And you would know the great Roy Coyle came to see me. He was managing ARINS at the time. He was previously a Linfield manager for a long time, and I didn't fancy going to ARINS, to be honest. And then Linfield came in, and I met Jim Emery, who was the scout at the time, with Trevor Anderson, the manager, out at the it was a post house thing, I think, a hotel out at the airport, and had a conversation and really liked what I heard, and then decided that's where I wanted to go. Explaining that to a few people was interesting, but it was it's what I wanted to do at the time. I wanted a new challenge, and it was certainly a challenge. It was going to be a challenge on the pitch, but I wanted to go somewhere that was going to be successful, that I was going to be challenged. And obviously it was going to be challenged on the pitch because the demands were so high at Linfield, and then obviously off the pitch it was probably would have been seen as a high profile move and a peculiar move, I suppose.
Yeah. What was the reaction in Dublin when that was announced?
It was probably mixed. People that would be close to me just see it as get on, go play football. People outside might have seen it as a little bit different. It was, once I started to play, it was fine. And yeah, I got stick for I got more stick in Dublin for playing for Linfield than I did in Belfast, from supporters of other clubs, to be fair. So, but I could understand that as well. So you just have to get on with it.
And did you move to Belfast and live?
No, I used to travel at the time. I think the troubles were still going on when I signed for Linfield. I think there was a ceasefire call around April '94, and at that stage, Linfield they wouldn't let me drive all the way to Dublin, so I drove to the Fairways Hotel in Dundalk. The roads were completely different as they are now. You went through every little town and village to get to Belfast. They'd pick me up there on a Tuesday and a Thursday night. A kit man used to drive down, pick me up, bring me to training, and then drive me back there, and I'd get in the car and drive home. And then on a Saturday, depending where we were playing, we'd either drive or I'd jump on the train. And a lot of the time we got off the train in Newry because there was notoriously bomb scares from Newry up, and we didn't want to take the chance that we'd miss a game, whatever the case may be. But for my Linfield career, I very rarely drove to Belfast. I was picked up at the Fairways Hotel in Dundalk a lot of the time. Desi Gorman was playing, and Desi lived in Dundalk. So, but it was more hard on the kit man than it was on me, because he's had to drop back and then drive back to Belfast as well. So, but it's what they wanted to do. They just felt it was better. It was better structure for the club, and they were more happy with that situation.
And then what about the Linfield supporters? How was that journey for you from the start?
I went to Linfield and I had a bit of an injury, and I didn't really get to the form I sort of wanted to be in, because I'd been playing well at Bows. I'd won the Player of the Year and the year before, and I was playing well, but I got a knockdown in Limerick playing for Bows and my ankle, and I struggled a little bit. And then first 3 or 4 games, I got taken off. The crowd were a little bit restless, as you know they are at Windsor. And then I scored a goal against Cliftonville, actually, with my head, believe it or not. And the manager took me off and the crowd booed, but they more booed him for taking me off than me. So in fairness to Trevor, he said to me coming off, well, listen, that's you now arrived. The supporters have taken to you, so get on with it now. So, but listen, I've said this loads of times. The supporters at Linfield were brilliant to me. They were just went out of the way to make sure that I was happy and I was safe and there was no issues, and there wasn't. They looked after me tremendously well. Yeah,
I have a good friend who's involved in some of the structures in Linfield as a volunteer, and I told him I was talking to you, and he just lit up with
yeah, like
pleasure.
I said, I was very fortunate as well, and football is like that. You get times where I arrived at Linfield in January, and I think we won 3 trophies, maybe 4 trophies from January to April, and it's just one of them things that it happens, and it went really well. And I remember after we won the league, last day of the season, we beat Glentoran, which is obviously the big derby. Myself and Desi Gorman scored the goals, and then we Irish Cup. And one of the Irish, we did an open top bus tour to Shankill Road. So it's the last place I expected to see myself in 1994 was going up the Shankill Road on a bus. But like I said, I was so well looked after. It was incredible.
And do you feel, looking back on it, that you learnt about the support base at Linfield, what kind of people support Linfield, and also what their politics are as well? I
think it's like I said, that you're always learning, and like I said, my time at Linfield was probably more sheltered as a player than I was when I went back as a general manager because of the situation. But yeah, like the big thing I took out playing for Linfield was all these lads were the same as me. There was no difference. You know, there was no difference to them. They all had the same. We were all working then. It was part-time. They all had to get up in the morning, go to work, earn a living, look after their families. On the outside, everybody thinks, well, they're over there and we're over here, and it's different. But it's not. You know, it's just a common goal to win football matches. But again, you have to respect and understand everybody's, whether that's politics or religion. And I wouldn't say it was overly discussed. Probably would have been more banter around it than anything else. But you obviously knew. And it's probably the one big difference I always find, even when I went back, I was at Linfield a few years ago as the general manager for 4 years. And it's one thing I always try to explain. It's never a conversation in Dublin. You know, because they ask, like, you know, you're at Linfield. People don't care. You know, it's not, and it's different than when you go over the border and into Northern Ireland. It becomes a conversation, which is the bit that I always find with, you know, nobody really cares down here. Is what I see, whether that's in sport, or maybe that's me completely different. I don't know, but I've always felt that way. That, you know, I went back to Linfield as a general manager. Nobody batted an eyelid. You know, north or south. As a player, it was a little bit different because of the times.
So do you think the times have changed so that when you went back as general manager,
absolutely, drastically, and obviously for the better. You know, and that's, you know, if it where it was in, you know, '94 to where when I went back as the general manager, there's no comparison.
When you were a general manager then at Linfield, what kind of things were you trying to do with the club to? What kind of changes did you make? Because it seems to me that one of the things that's really important about thinking about you in Irish football is that general manager role is something that you've actually developed in a way.
Yeah,
within both leagues.
I think with Linfield as the general manager role, you're going into a club and you have to respect the traditions of the club, the background of the club, the background of supporters of the club. You know, and nobody wants to lose their identity. That's important. So you're trying to manage that, but there's also then, you know, football has changed. So you have a situation where you've got other clubs in the Northern Irish League that have now been heavily invested in from outside, which is good for the game. That's not a criticism. Linfield's a different model. It's a members club. It's run by a board of directors, but there's only so much revenue you can bring in through that. Where if you're going up against clubs that have an outside investment, that's difficult. And Bows are probably in a similar situation at the moment. So you need to be inventive. You know, so you're trying to attract new sponsors and more people to the games. But you're also trying to be true to the morals of the club. So that was difficult. That was one thing I did find difficult, because you're trying to balance that. And
do those two things clash then sometimes?
Yeah, and listen, you know, I've had this conversation with the board at Linfield. It is an issue because, you know, went and spoke to companies and they're reluctant to come and get involved at Linfield because they feel, you know, it's one side of the community or wherever the case may be. So that's a completely different scenario to a club in Dublin. You know, and it's a bit of a dilemma for Linfield at the moment because of, like I said, the investment into other clubs within the Northern Irish League. So it's trying to, I won't say educate because they're very educated supporters, as you know, Linfield fans, but it's trying to, you know, the club needs investment to continue to be as successful as it is. Linfield is about winning. You know, if you play for Linfield or your sport, it's about winning. It's not about anything else. But to continue to do that when you've got clubs getting stronger because there's outside investment coming, then you have to be inventive. You have to find different ways. And that's probably a conundrum for them at the moment that they need to try to work out.
Maybe we'll go on to Hibs then. So you were manager at Hibs. That was a big move, a big profile move at the time, and a great thing for the League of Ireland to have someone go from League of Ireland management into the Scottish League. Did you find that an easy transition into the different league? Do you take everything with you and it's simply the same, or was it?
Yeah, I found it, an easy transition. Yeah, I would have known a lot about the Scottish game. Much bigger club, much bigger setup, obviously bigger budget to manage, but also background and structure was much more professional than I'd been used to. But the transition, I didn't find it difficult. The media end of it, I probably found a little bit difficult because it's so intense. Scottish football is really intense, and it's like, you know, in Edinburgh it's obviously Hibs and Hearts, and in Glasgow it's Celtic and Rangers, and even in the likes of Aberdeen and Dundee, they're all big clubs, so everybody wants a story. There's so many journalists. Football is the main sport, so that part of it probably took me a while to get used to. Expectation again. Probably being at Linfield or playing for Linfield, the expectation was huge. Where at Hibs, it's similar. Even though they haven't been overly successful, there's still that expectation that they should be doing well, and rightly so, because they're a big club with a big fan base.
Yeah. So when you're at Linfield, there's obviously that is a club that identifies with the loyalist and unionist community in Belfast, and Hibs we would maybe look at as a club that identifies with the Irish community in that part of Scotland. Was that a challenge to you in any way, or
No.
is that how Hibs is actually formulated?
I wouldn't think. I'm not sure. You know, maybe the perception outside is that's what Hibs is about, but it's not. It's a very diverse club. It's a very mixed club. It's not really. I think in Edinburgh in general, it's probably not overly discussed. It obviously has its origins and its background is in, you know, Irish identity, and that's really important to them. But I think it's developed into something bigger than that at the moment. If you ask Hibs fans, they don't like Celtic or Rangers. It's not. They don't dislike one. They just don't like either of them. Obviously, they don't like Hearts, but they don't like Celtic and Rangers equally. It's not, well, we like Celtic a little bit better because they're Irish. But it's not. They just dislike both Glasgow clubs.
So was there any advantage to you in being Irish and going to Hibs as a manager? Did you get a bit of a pass for a while, or was it a...
No, it's not. Again, I think football fans just want someone to come in and don't care who they are or what their background is or religion is or identity is. They want their team to be successful, and whoever brings that to the table. And that's probably the one thing I learned at Linfield. Linfield fans didn't care what I was or who I was once I was producing for them and giving everything I had to make sure that we were successful. And most football fans are like that. I think you'll always have lunatics in the background but most football fans just want their team to be successful. The first thing they'll always look for is that people are committed and work hard for their club. You know, I felt I did that as a player, and as a manager. You know, so I think most football fans just take that as read and see it as, if you do the job for us, well then that's great.
You become one of their own once you prove yourself.
That's what you do. You know, you are, like I said, you know, when I was at Linfield, they christened me Billy. They didn't want to call me Pat or Patrick or Paddy, so they christened me Billy Fenlon. And that stuck to me. I still go when I go, even when I went back as general manager. People still call me Billy. So that's what I'm saying. That you have to take all this stuff into context. You know, that's what it's about.
You're at a club now which deals with issues that we've been talking about, which are issues of identity and football in a very particular way, and in a way that's really interesting. There was a great, many of you will know, there's a really good article in the New York Times in March about Bohs and the way they present themselves and how they deal with issues around refugees and racism and so on. And maybe you could explain a little bit from your own point of view how that functions at an everyday level in the club, and then think about, well, you know, does it present difficulties for the club, or it seems to be immensely successful as a model at the moment?
I don't think it creates difficulties. I think the model of the club, when I played for Bohs in the 90s, and I managed Bohs around 2007, 8, 9, I think, before I went to Scotland, and the club then to now is completely different. The amount of work that's gone on within the community, you know, to develop the club and build the club, but also to brand the club, not just in this country, but Bohs now is a brand outside of this country. Like you said, the New York Times run an article. So the amount of work that goes on, you know, around all that is incredible. And there's a balance for football supporters, because, you know, Bohs supporters want success. They're delighted with all that. The team is being spoke about all over the world, and you know, but they're not being spoke about for winning trophies. So there's, as a director of football, there's a balance with the club to, you know, everything that's going on in the club is brilliant, and the amount of work that people do is important. But my job is to try guide us on the football side to make sure that we get success. The last time they won a trophy, when I was a manager there, which is a long time ago, and it was similar when it went as a player at the Bows. They hadn't won a trophy for a long time. We won the FAI Cup, so I'm hoping it's going to follow me and we become a little bit successful. But the structure of the club and the dynamic of the club and how it works is for a League of Ireland club, it's incredible to see on a day-to-day basis the amount of work that goes on. We've got a lot of staff who are in the club out with the football side of it as well, which is brilliant. But I think people see now, Bows are spoken about in a different light. My job is what people talk about for what they do on the pitch. Other people's job is what's going on off the pitch. But I think it's a simple. I think a lot of the other clubs, I'm not saying I think Bows are a leader in this, but I think if you look at League of Ireland clubs and even Irish League clubs, if you stick to just your core base, and this is where I'm getting to with the Linfield stuff a little bit. If you stick to your core base, which is maybe, in Linfield's case, maybe 3,000 to 5,000, generally, Bows probably similar. If that's your market, you're never going to grow. So what Bows have done, they've looked outside and said, well, we know we've got that market. How do we get a bigger market? And they've shown how you do that. You develop the club and you structure it in a way that other people are interested, not just for football reasons, but for a lot of other reasons, So it's really good marketing, I suppose, on behalf of the club.
I know when I was living in Belfast in the early 2000s and was back watching Linfield games, particularly midweek games, but weekend as well. And the thing that struck me then was the average age of the supporters would have been 55, 60 maybe. And you couldn't see the next generation of support coming through then. But I think that may have changed in the interim, has it?
Yeah, I think there's there's been a big emphasis on that, and the club are still looking at ways to develop that. But I think you're right, male, my age, 55 to 60, sort of dominated. But I think over the years that I've been there, we've seen that gradually change. A lot more female support, a lot more young people coming to the games, and you have to, because, like I said, and that's where Bows have done really well. They've driven that, and you can see that grow all the time. Like I'm involved in the game, even going back to being a supporter of the game, the League of Ireland, where you could have walked into any League of Ireland game in them days and paid your money and got in. You can't get a ticket now for most League of Ireland games, which is incredible. So we now have a new problem where the grounds are not big enough, because the one thing you don't want to do when we're in this situation where it's really positive and people want to go is you don't want to be turning people away. But unfortunately, we're in that situation at the moment, so that's where it needs investment to try bring the stadiums up to a standard. But I think, going back to again, that's all part of the discussion around Linfield, how they make the club more open, how do you bring more people to it? Because if you're only ever going to stick to that core base, it's going to be difficult to develop. And especially on the back of where football is at the moment, there is a lot of outside investment, whether that's in Northern Ireland, in the League of Ireland, in Scotland or England. We've seen clubs grow through outside investment, but where Linfield and Bows are different. They're members clubs. Bows have known they're a members club, but needed to find a different way of having a different revenue stream. Probably where Linfield are at the moment. They're going to have to look at and see how they can drive the revenue stream up, because most football leagues in the world are driven by TV revenue. Leagues, clubs, we don't have that here. So it's, like I said, you've got to find other ways of producing a real revenue stream that's going to help you develop, unless you can find, like Glentoran have a big investor, Larne have an investor, Coleraine have just got an investor. It's the same here. There's heavy investment in some of the clubs in the League of Ireland. So if you're a members club, you've got a dilemma. Do you stick as a members club? Do you open out maybe to get investment, or do you find different ways to work? So it's a challenge.
I was thinking that your Shelburne team gave me two of the best League of Ireland experiences that I had. One was going to Lansdowne Road for the Deportivo La Coruña match, which is an incredible experience. And they were such a great team. That was in the Champions League. It was the furthest any League of Ireland team has ever got in the Champions League. It was the final qualifying round, 2004, I think, wasn't it? Yeah,
2004, and I think Deportivo had got to the semi-final of the Champions League the year previous, so it was a daunting task. But to see 29,000, 30,000 people at League of Ireland, watching the League of Ireland team was brilliant. But then it was difficult to go back to maybe 1,800 the following week in a league game. So But we're in a different area at the moment. We're in a different area completely at the moment in relation to crowds, which is great.
And then the second experience was the Setanta Cup final in 2005.
Bad experience for me.
Bad experience for you, but a great one for me. And the final of it, we'll maybe talk about the format in a second, but the final was Linfield against Shelburne, or Shelburne against Linfield in Tulka Park. It was an All-Ireland competition, a briefly run All-Ireland competition, went on for a few years. Linfield, it was the first year of it. Linfield won 2-0. You were reminding me, it was Glenn Ferguson and Peter Thompson scored the goals. It was really, I was living in Dublin at the time, so it was actually quite a moving experience for me to go. I went with my various family members, and I actually found it really thrilling in some way to be able to go to a Linfield game in Dublin, because I was living in Dublin. And it passed off reasonably well, and it was, it was well organised. It was exciting, at least more exciting for me than it was for you. But that other way that you're talking about revenue raising and the future of football on the island, and obviously some kind of all-island competition is one format where that might happen. And so I know that during COVID you were involved a little bit in lobbying for at least the consideration of an all-island competition. But could you give us a kind of sense of where your thoughts are on that at the moment?
Yeah, I've always said that, the Setanta Cup was a brilliant experience. I was fortunate enough to win it as well as lose the final to Linfield. But I think the Setanta Cup, let's be honest, and was driven obviously by the revenue. The revenue for Setanta Cup was incredible for Irish League clubs or League of Ireland club. My take on the All-Ireland structure has always been a case of, if you're talking, there's no harm comes out of talking in relation. Can you have a proper discussion of how you develop the game? It's not about, I think, developing the game on the island is where I see it. If part of that is having a cup competition that develops the game, and I've had this conversation with clubs in the north of Ireland that, most of it is really around revenue. There's a real interest if the revenue is big, and because they are so short of revenue streams. And then you have obviously the political side of it, whether, if there's a cup that fear of there's a cup competition, does that lead to one league, which leads to all other problems? We can't have one league, we only have one national team, so it becomes a bigger political issue there, which you try to stay away from. Mine is, how do you develop the game north and south? If a cup competition helps develop the game north and south, well then for me it's good. If it doesn't, well then that's fair enough, and a discussion around that is how we can make the Northern Ireland Football League better and the League of Ireland better. Well then that discussion should take place, and if it's an All-Ireland League or an All-Ireland Cup, well then I think it's worth discussing. I think we're in a much better place from a political point of view or a trouble point of view around All-Ireland competitions. Like I've said before, you'll always have people that will attach themselves to things. That's unfortunate, but it's much easier managed, and I think it's only beneficial for me if it develops the game. That's the way I look at it. If it's going to develop the game, well then I think it's certainly worth a conversation. I think you'll always find that there's maybe in both associations there's a little bit of fear. Fear is good at times, but I think you've got to put that self-preservation behind and say, well, how do we make the game better? Because if we're being honest, League of Ireland football or Irish League football down here particularly, we're behind the other sports, the other big sports, rugby, GAA, and it's probably similar in Northern Ireland. So it's a discussion. For me, it should be debated and discussed properly, and we get to a situation where we think, this would develop the game in the country, whether that's a revenue stream that goes back into the clubs or goes back into underage development. We have a situation where we have this weekend, my club Bows are playing Linfield in a women's senior competition, which is brilliant. So it can happen, but I'm only for it if it's going to help develop. It's not just to have a competition for another competition, because clubs will say that as well. It's another competition. How do we manage that? How do we manage players if we're in Europe? So there's a big debate around it. But I think the key for the clubs is revenue. If it's going to bring more revenue in, that revenue can be used to develop the game in both jurisdictions, well then I think it's well worth discussing.
So you think within the clubs there isn't particularly a resistance to the
I think,
idea?
yeah.
Because if it generates revenue and improves the standard of football?
Yeah, like the last thing the clubs need is a competition that's going to be a drain. That's going to be seen as a second-rate competition and the reason the Santa Cup died off was because the revenue stream dropped drastically, and then the clubs decided, well, we've got a bigger game at the weekend in the league, so we'll weaken our team, and then it loses its value. So that's what I'm saying. It can't be that. It has to be, where it's going to be a benefit for everybody.
In order to do that, do you need some kind of dispensation from UEFA to have a cross-border competition, or does it?
I think as a cup competition, it's fine. Obviously, the competition becomes even stronger if you could add European places within that competition. The last discussion was around maybe the two leagues, playing, deciding then who's the champions of each league, and then maybe a top four in each league going into a new All-Ireland league. And then, but again, does that league take away a European place? So there's a big debate around it. It is it's not an easy conversation. It's not an easy conversation even politically. It's football-wise, it's a difficult conversation as well. But I think it needs to be thoroughly investigated to see. And again, I go back to the same thing. How do you make the game better? For me, it's about making the game better for everybody.
Good. Okay, I suspect we have a lot of football fans in the audience who would like to ask you questions, so I might hand over
Not too many hard
to
ones.
some of the League of Ireland fans and others in the audience. So does anybody want to ask Pat a question?
I think there's a gap. I think there is a gap within the two leagues. I don't think the gap is maybe as big as people think. I've been involved in both leagues over the last few years. I think we've seen Linfield come down and win the Santa Cup in the very first one. So we've seen them hold their own. We've seen Northern Irish clubs hold their own. We're in it. I think what it does, it will help develop, and that's what I'm saying. If it helps develop the game, does it make the Irish league team stronger? Because there's a bigger revenue stream coming in through it. I don't think it was ever predominantly dominated by League of Ireland clubs, probably till late on when teams start to really weaken their sides because of, like I said, that situation that weekend. The league game at the weekend became more important than a midweek game down in Cork or Dundalk for Linfield or Crusaders or Glentoran, whoever the case may be. So I don't agree that it will become dominated by the teams down south, because I think it would actually help the northern teams grow, and I think some of the northern teams are growing as it is. I think that for me, having that 4 years back at Linfield, I've seen that the league actually grow on the pitch. You've probably seen that as well. It's obviously more difficult now for Linfield to be winning. It goes back to probably the discussion earlier on, but you've seen that investment in better players coming into other clubs. So I think if it was an all-Ireland competition, I think that would help. That's a difficult question. It's a big question as well, and it goes back to what I talked about with Linfield, and even go back to that all-Ireland discussion of football. I'm conscious that, and I would have had this debate with Linfield supporters, when I was the general manager there and I spoke about the all-Ireland, it would have annoyed a fair few Linfield fans because they don't want to be talking about that. So I think you've got to be careful about, people's identity and culture and everything else in relation to how you make it better. I think there's different dynamics around rugby and soccer as well. I think the fan base are completely different. And it's like I said, go back to the All-Ireland discussion. It's about it's developing the game. But I'd agree with you that I think if you can develop the game on whether that's cup competition initially, how that is, that's all stuff that can help, because people can travel the country, go to games, enjoy themselves, go back to Belfast or back to Coleraine, no issues. That all builds people's perception. I've spoke to Linfield fans that, we're in Tolka Park that night, and the perception of Dublin after was completely different to what was before that. So I think they're all things that can, as a developer, I think it's a difficult one because it's you know, you're trying to develop the game on the island to make the game better, both north and south. But I think by doing that, you can develop the relationship between people, both north and south. Because it's like anything, if you have a competition or an event that goes well and people enjoy it and people travel from different areas, well then it leads to more. So there's definitely you know, by having a tournament that is all island inclusive, I think will have huge benefits in developing relationships both north and south.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to the end. I think you can see why we wanted Pat to come and take part in this discussion. He's a man of great integrity and immense experience. He has a unique experience in the way crossing the border early on in the Irish game and thinking about the relationship between football and identity with absolute integrity. So it's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Pat. Thank you so much for doing
Thank you very much. Enjoy that. Thank you.